I think it's pretty common knowledge that Mormons like to share their beliefs with people. As Mormons, I find that we sometimes interact with people, knowing that it won't lead to baptism right away, but we do so anyway with the belief that we are planting seeds, or rather, preparing the hearts and minds of the people we interact with, so that they may be better prepared to accepting the gospel later down the road. The reason I'm drawing attention to this is because this is also how the disciples of cultural Marxism operate. In my first video, I explained how cultural Marxism is based on a narrative that separates society into groups of victims and oppressors. In order for this narrative to have any currency, it is essential that Marxists instill a worldview that prepares your children to seeing society in terms of victims and oppressors. This preparatory worldview is called postmodernism. Postmodernism is not so much an ideology, but rather, it is the lens through which we interpret the world. It deconstructs belief structures, creating the void that Marxism later fills. Now, before I explain it, I want to point out, first and foremost, that postmodernism is in direct opposition to the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is because postmodernism is, at its core, the rejection of universal and absolute truth. It is based on the belief that reality is inaccessible to human understanding. So that begs the question, what is reality if our minds can't access it? Well, according to postmodernism, reality is what you make of it. You see, there is no one truth upon which we're all operating, but rather interpretations of truth. You have your interpretation of truth, and I have my interpretation of truth. And even though our interpretations of truth may conflict and contradict one another, that's okay, because according to postmodern philosophy, no one person's interpretation of truth is more valid or preferable than the next person's. The reason is because postmodern philosophers saw the fact that there can be so many interpretations of truth as evidence that there can't just be one truth that applies to everyone. So things like morality, philosophy, and art, well, these are all interpreted by the individual for him or herself. Everyone establishes their own identity, their own purpose, their own meaning, their own ethics, and their own belief systems, and no one can say otherwise. In the words of Friedrich Nietzsche, "You have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist." End quote. Now, it doesn't take much digging to find the absurdities in this worldview. One glaring instance would be the fact that declaring that there is no absolute truth is a statement of absolute truth. But pointing this out doesn't seem to have an effect on the postmodernists who are passing this philosophy on to our children. I once learned about a pastor who was doing a Bible study with some of the youth in his congregation. During the study, he made a statement of absolute truth. He said, "This is wrong." One of the youth spoke up and said, "Well, that can't be true for everyone." This is an example of postmodern thinking. Now, if there's a set of commandments that went along with this worldview, the first commandment would be this: you shall not impose your interpretation of truth onto anyone else, and any attempt to do so would be considered oppression. So if someone comes along claiming that their truth applies to someone else, or worse, that it applies to everyone, well, that is considered a disguised attempt to grab power. So in other words, declarations of universal truth are considered power plays. This is also why we are dealing with a crisis of freedom of speech, especially with Christians. If you are a person who believes in absolute and universal truth, you should not be allowed to speak, especially if it pertains to morality and ethics, because your claims of truth are considered oppressive. By engaging and conversing with you, they are facilitating your acquisition for power. As you can see, this worldview has corrupted dialogue. The purpose of engaging in dialogue is for the participants to come to a greater understanding of the truth. But what if the person you're engaging with doesn't even believe that there's a truth to be known? What is the purpose of language if everyone can fuse their own interpretations into the words and statements we use? For postmodernists, language is only useful for deconstructing truth claims. And this makes sense because if claims of truth are meant to oppress, then deconstructing those truth claims is essential for liberation from that oppression. Therefore, language is primarily a tool used to deconstruct what we would call reality. It is weaponized rhetoric intended not to advance truth and knowledge, but rather to make their arguments persuasive and attractive. This is where we get ad hominem attacks, straw man arguments, and shaming techniques with appeals to empathy and tolerance. So what are some other consequences of postmodern thinking? Well, since there is no absolute truth, then all the social systems upon which our civilization is built are inventions of men, or as they like to call them, social constructs. For example, the traditional family and gender roles are considered social constructs. They aren't based on any kind of truth or reality or even biology, but rather, they are the creation of men, and are products of the culture and the society at the time they were constructed. This is the sort of thinking that has led not so much to redefine the family, but to do away with any definitions altogether. Everything about who we are or who we think we are, we only think we are because of the social constructs to which we belong. Our race, sex, and sexual proclivities are social constructs. Our value structures and belief systems are social constructs. According to postmodernism, they aren't real. We only think they're real because of the culture in which we were raised. This is what is being taught in our schools and universities, especially in the humanities and social sciences. They are filled with professors whose purpose it is to deconstruct any identity, social structure, or belief system that is grounded in truth. They aim at destroying the confidence once held by our people that there is such a thing as a firm foundation. And what is the result? What happens to these kids once their belief structures are completely hollowed out by their professors? What ends up filling that void? There is a Twitter account dedicated to showing the transformations some of these kids make after attending universities. I know that these are more radical examples, but it is concerning. You can see, just by looking at them, that they have become completely untethered from reality. This is what happens when everything about your identity is deconstructed. Don't think that just because you send your kids to BYU that they won't be taught this stuff. The truth is that we are wired to having a belief system. We all need a set of beliefs that give us purpose, that let us know how to orient ourselves in the world. What often fills the void left by postmodern philosophy is cultural Marxism. It gives people purpose, which is fighting so-called oppression. Sinners are straight white males. Saints are women, minorities, and gays. Authority, especially moral authority, is given to whoever can prove to be the most oppressed. This struggle for people to prove their victim status is what we often refer to as the Oppression Olympics. It doesn't make much sense until you understand that what they are doing is establishing a hierarchy of moral authority. This is what has led to the culture that we have now, where power comes in the form of being a victim. Now, while we're on the subject of Marxism, I will say this much. Our schools are not teaching people about Marxism. They are not teaching that it has failed and resulted in massive genocides everywhere it has been tried. If we knew our history, we would know that some of the greatest atrocities that have happened over the last 100 years were done at the hands of people who believed themselves to be oppressed. As I said at the beginning, postmodernism is a worldview that is in complete opposition to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Those who peddle it are either ignorant of this fact, or they know exactly what they're doing. Postmodernism, cultural Marxism, feminism, and social justice are all branches of the same rotten Marxist tree. It is a competing religion attempting to grow its membership within the church. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we believe truth to be established by God as revealed through His prophets. We believe that it is eternal, fixed, and universal. We don't believe that all behavior is equally acceptable and that all morality is equally wholesome. We don't believe that all lifestyles are equally admissible before God. We believe that there is only one way of life that is preferable above all the rest, and that is the lifestyle that is most in line with the gospel of Jesus Christ. In the words of Christ, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. We are seeing firsthand what happens to a civilization that abandons its firm foundation. The only remedy to the chaos we are experiencing is to confront this destructive philosophy and speak the truth in the face of political correctness. I once heard it said that the future of the West depends on those brave enough to be called racist, bigot, sexist, homophobe, and xenophobe, and not flinch or back down. If you do your research, you'll find that almost every one of these words didn't exist until the last century. They were created and or popularized as verbal weaponry intended to shut down dialogue, which must take place if we are to have a chance at saving the West. It will take courage, but we must dispel these myths that have been taught to us in our schools and universities. We must break the conditioning that has been imposed on us by our propaganda and train our children to recognize and reject it. And most of all, we must encourage people to reject postmodernism and invite them to come unto Christ. Thanks for watching.